Before we start this video, a large thank you to Brittany, Christian, a name I cannot pronounce, Dennis, A. Egloff, another name I cannot pronounce, another name I unfortunately cannot pronounce. Wow, there's a lot of those in this video. Primo and ZX for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. I'm very sorry for being incapable of pronouncing your names, guys, but seriously, thank you so much for the support. It means a lot to me. Hello guys, and in this mini-series we're going to learn to create a character creation screen, like the one I have on screen here now. This is actually from my solo project. One note before we start, you will not need to have started the Dark Souls and Unity series to use this tutorial. If you do not follow that tutorial, you will still be able to make the character creation screen, see the character preview window, name the character, choose the character's hairstyles, beard styles, skin colors, etc. The only thing you will not be able to do if you have not followed that tutorial is to use the Create a Class menu option where we change the character's equipment. Because for that to have happened, you would need to have the equipment system that I'm going to use in this tutorial series that is used and brought over from the Dark Souls and Unity tutorial series. So TLDR, you can use everything in this tutorial except for one button that we're going to make, so you don't need to have watched the other tutorial. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is right click in this brand new scene here, go to UI, and create an image that will automatically make us a canvas. I'm going to name this image background, and I'm going to change this background a little bit. I'm going to go up here and hold Alt and click this button in the bottom right corner, and that will make it the size of the canvas. And then I'm going to change the color to black. Next, I'm going to click on the canvas, going to change from constant pixel size to scale with screen size, make my base reference 1920 by 1080. Okay, so I want to divide this into 3 sections. So I'm going to make an image here in the background, and I'm going to call this panel, actually I'll call it left panel. So I have a left panel, a middle panel, and a right panel. So I'll call this one left panel background. I'm going to hit Alt, make it the size of the canvas again, and let's do some quick math. So if we divide 1920 by 3, that gives us 640. And if we take 1920 minus 640, that would give us 1,280. So that means right here, the right should say 1,280 up here, and that will be exactly 1/3 of the screen. Now let's duplicate this object and move it to the middle, and that should sit right on 640. There we go, and let's duplicate it one more time, and that should sit on 0, and that should be exactly 3 panels, the exact same size, perfectly centered. It's going to name that to middle panel, and then duplicate that and name this one right panel. And get rid of the 1. And now if I move this to the right again, it should sit right on 0. Yes, it should line up perfectly, and that is exactly 3 panels. Now, we can't really tell them apart, so I'm going to quickly make a Photoshop asset and drop it in the project. Here we go. I've called a panel. If you guys want, I can link that. You can just use it. It's just literally a box so we can see the outline. I'm going to change to a sprite 2D, and I'm going to apply it as a sprite on all 3 of these panels, and now we have something that looks like this. Okay, so I want to make sure these panels are all bonded to the proper positions on the screen. But first, I'm actually going to make another empty game object under the left panel background, and I'm going to call that main menu buttons. Apologies for the noise in the background. I'm actually visiting my my family's house at home, so the mic setup is not exactly the same. All right, I'm going to hit Alt and make that the same size of the panel by hitting this bottom right button. Then I'm going to go to the left panel, and I'm going to bond it to the left side of the screen, or anchor it rather, and the middle is already in the middle, and then the right panel I'm going to anchor to the right side of the screen. Alright, now that's done, we got to add a vertical layout group. But first we're going to need to make a button, so we got something to actually lay out. And I'm going to just create a button real quick here, and I'm going to change the text size and the color just a little bit. And I just realized I put that button in the wrong place. So let's move to the left panel instead of the middle panel. Then let's add a vertical layout group to the main menu buttons. And I'm going to change it to middle center. And all this does is if you make more than one button, it equally spaces them out and makes them nice and organized in a vertical fashion. So I'm going to change the color a little bit here. The button, going to change the text size and make it stand out a little bit more. I'm not going to go too deeply into the UI because this tutorial is for the sake of functionality, not for the sake of making the UI look pretty. So once you have that to a point where you like it, we're just going to duplicate the button for a couple of times. I'm going to make a button, first one for the character's name, the second one for the character's class. I'm going to rename the text here and make it say class. And then I'm going to duplicate the button again, and we're going to do one for hair, and we'll also do one for skin. So we'll have 4 here. And basically the principles of the functionality that we're going to use for hair can also be used for beard or anything else. So I'm not going to do that because it's essentially the same process of hiding or enabling certain game objects. And the UI and the menus will look exactly the same, except instead of hair, you'd have beards. Okay, so we're also going to do hair color as well and the skin tone. So I'm going to lower the spacing just a little bit on that so it looks a bit neater. And I'm actually going to drag down the main menu game object here because above that in that empty space, we're going to put a title of sorts for this side of the panel. So I'm going to add a text object, and I'm just going to call this title, or you can call it menu title. And then I'm going to put that just up here, and I'm going to make the text much, much larger. And I'm going to press Alt, make it the size of this game object, and then raise it to the point where we lower the other one. And I'm going to make it white so it stands out up against the black background. Change the font size to like 70 something. That looks okay. And I'll just call this menu, or you can call it main menu or character menu, whatever you want to call it. Again, the UI here isn't the purpose, it is the functionality. So I'm just going to put, we'll put character. Okay, that looks fine. Character menu. And let's change the font a little bit. There we go, 60 looks a lot better. Okay, so now over here on the vertical layer group, I'm just going to lower the spacing. You can see it has an effect of kind of crunching it together because this is a little bit further apart where we only have 4 buttons. And now that we have all this, the left menu here actually has some substance. And eventually all these buttons will be hooked up to open submenus where you can actually tweak things in the character. But now let's go to the right menu. I'm going to paste this menu title. I'm going to hit Alt, make it the same size of the right panel, and then kind of raise it. Actually, I'm going to rename that to character preview because this is where you're going to see your character's preview of what they look like. And we can actually make this the same size as the other menu title by checking out the bottom measurement, which is 840, and then making them both 840 so they line up properly. And that looks really nice. So let's actually make a square or a little space on our character preview window for our character to sit as well. But before we do that, I'm actually going to drag in my player model. And if you're using a Cinti model like me, you can just drag in their base model. Now, this is from the Dark Souls series, so I actually have a bunch of stuff in this, obviously. But don't worry, none of this at all is necessary for this tutorial outside of the equipment, which you don't necessarily need to do. For the hair customization, the skin tones, the beard changing, all that stuff, you don't need any of this. So I'm going to rename this prefab to Player Character Creator. And if you are following from the Dark Souls series, make sure you drop in your UI, otherwise you're going to get an error. Don't worry, the canvas will overtake that. It still should anyway. And then under your UI, make sure you drag in the health bar variable. And if you're getting this error, make sure you replace the input system. This is if you're coming from my tutorial. And also go to the camera, the input handler here, where it says camera handler dot set height. Just you make sure you want to say if camera handler does not equal null, because if it's not in the scene, then obviously you can't run this code. So just put that there, and that will stop you from getting an error. And this is only important if you're coming over from the Dark Souls and Unity series. This is something you won't even have, so don't worry about it. Now we can move on. There's no errors in the console. We're good to go. So we want to make it so our character is actually visible in the character preview window in such a fashion. So let's go to our camera and change the background color to black. Let's change the clear flags to solid color. And let's position this camera so it is in front of our character. Think of this camera as the viewport of what we're going to see when we look at the window. That's how we're going to set it up at least. So put it in a place where you get a nice full view of your character, or maybe like waist high. This is what we're going to use just to actually show the preview. I'm going to move this away so it's not on top of the UI so we can see what we're doing. And I am going to try to position the camera to the best of my ability. There we go, right in front of the character. So with that done, we're going to actually create a thing called a render texture. But before we do that, let's go to the right panel and let's make a placement, or a place where we can put it. So I'm going to create a UI image. I'm just going to call this character preview background. This is going to be the backdrop, or just call it background even, for the character preview itself. I'm going to make it the full size of this window, and we're going to lower it just a little bit. So this isn't actually going to be the preview itself. This is going to be what the preview is resting on top of. So think of this like the border. And the color is actually probably fine, but I'm going to match the color of this just because I'm a stickler. And then I'm going to create a raw image. Sorry, not an image. I didn't mean to do that. A raw image on top of this. And let's resize that to the same size as the border. I'm going to call it character preview. And again, you can hit Alt up here and then click this. And then you can resize this just so it's a little bit smaller than this, and you should have a nice little border effect when we're done. So just like that. And now we need to create the render texture. So right click down here and create a new, you want to click render texture, and then I'm going to call this character preview. And there's a position on the camera you can drag this in, and whatever the camera sees, it will fill on this texture. So let's make the size 1920 by 1080. So we get a nice resolution for it. And then if we click on our camera up here, which is positioned to look at our character, you will see a place for target texture. Drag that in. And then we can basically drag that texture into the empty space there on the character preview window, and this is what you get. Now you're going to get it looking really strange if you don't set the resolution to, set the native size. So what you want to do is go in here, and there should be a button here, set native size, and then hold shift when you resize it, and it will keep its native size. Otherwise you're going to get a stretched effect like that, and that's not what you want. So once you get that to a reasonable size, you position that inside the window. And now, as you can see, his hands are kind of hanging out there. And there's a very simple fix for this. Whatever is placed on the canvas will take priority if it's placed at the bottom of the hierarchy. So anything on the top basically gets stacked under. So what you can do is you can just create a couple of black images, like borders. You see how his arm is not going through the middle panel, it's kind of going behind it. So what we can do is actually just bring this panel up here, the right panel, right to the top. And we can create a couple of simple black little borders. So let's bring the if you bring the character above the background, see how it kind of gets hidden behind it. But if you put it below the background, it's in front of it. So whatever we put after the character preview window will actually hide it. So let's make two images. I'm just going to call them border 1 and then border 2. And I'm going to make them the same color as the background, which in my case is black. And I'm going to basically make them roughly the same size right here as this, and then kind of tuck them in like that. There we go. And just like that. And then I'm going to duplicate them and drag it over here. And then when you got them right where the arms should be and right at the borders of the screen, just drag them and bring them under the character preview image in the hierarchy, and there you go. Now the arm that goes outside the canvas, don't worry about that because you can't see that on the camera. If we hit play here now, I'm actually going to create an empty game object first under the player. I'm going to call player preview and drag that out just so we have the same transform. And then I'm going to basically put the player under that, and I'm going to add a plane to this, and I'm going to disable the mesh render, so it's a collider. This is so it won't fall out of focus because we have a rigid body and a capsule collider on it. And then I'm going to rename the camera to character preview camera. And I'm going to drag that under here as well for now. I think we'll have to move that in a second though. Okay, so now as you can see, we can see our character on the menu, and that works exactly as intended, but we can't move it. So the goal is to, when we move the mouse, to rotate the character left and right. Now we're going to read the mouse as a vector 2, and that's just simply means we're going to look for the up and down and left and right movement, a vector 2 ways, up, down, or left and right. So let's add a script to this, call it rotate character, rotate player, whatever you want to call it, add it to the player preview game object. So I've already set up the Unity input system on this project. If you haven't, and you don't know how to do it, I suggest you watch my video on it. I have one in my third-person controller series. It's very, very simple. Basically, we're going to look for the mouse's movement, and when we detect movement from the mouse going from left to right, we want to rotate the character left or right. It is very, very straightforward and very easy. So I'm going to call this rotate object. I'm going to open this up, and I am going to start by placing down a few variables. But first, I'm actually going to show you what we're looking for. So I'm going to delete the start and update function. And I'm going to go to the player controls, and I'm going to go to my player, my camera, which is actually just my mouse. As you can see, it's a vector 2. It's a pass-through, and I get this by reading my delta mouse, which means my mouse's movement. So when I move my mouse, it stores my movement as a 2D vector. And from there, I can grab that from a script, which is what we're going to do. We're going to look for the mouse's movement, and we're going to specifically target the mouse's movement on the x-axis, which is left and right. So I'm going to make an onEnable function on this rotate object. So this is called when the game object is turned on. I'm going to make a variable of type player controls, which is just what I've named my player's input system, which is using Unity's input system. I'm going to say player controls, if it equals null, we're going to say player controls equals new player controls. That just basically instantiated so we can use it if it's not already there. I'm going to make a variable of type vector2 called camera input, and I'm going to go to my player controls. I'm going to say player action or player movement, dot camera. That's where I'm storing that input for the camera. And then I'm going to say plus equals I equals camera input equals I dot read value vector 2. And that's supposed to actually be camera dot performed, not just camera. That's my bad. I'll fix that in a second. And all this does basically is it says every time the variable of camera is changed or there's data being passed through it, we're going to pass that onto this new variable camera input so we can use it. So if I move the mouse, it moves through that input and then it passes that information along to the camera input variable. And I'm just going to say player controls.enable. And what can we do with that information? Well, first, let's make a couple of floats. We're going to make a float for rotation amount and then a float for rotation speed. I'm going to initialize those at 1 and 5 respectively. The rotation amount is how many increments it will rotate, and the speed is how fast those increments get rotated. So then I'm going to make a vector 3 for my current rotation, and then a vector 3 for my target rotation. So basically, we're just going to slurp between the current rotation and the target rotation based upon our mouse's input. So on the update here, I'll make a start and update function. On the start function, I'm going to simply say my current rotation is equal to the transform dot Euler angles. And then down here in the update, we're going to use a very simple if statement. We're going to say if camera input dot x is greater than 0, well, then we know we want to actually increase the rotation. If the camera input dot x is less than 0, then we know we want to decrease the rotation. So if you're moving the mouse right, increase it. You're moving the mouse left, decrease it. And then we're going to say up here too, I forgot, target rotation equals transform dot Euler angles, because on start, they're both going to start at the same point, their current rotation and target rotation. So if our camera input dot x is greater than y, then our target rotation dot y equals target rotation dot y plus rotation amount. The y rotation, just so you know, is the rotation that will make it spin from left to right. And if it's less than y, we're going to say target rotation dot y minus rotation amount. So basically, you move the mouse right, you're going to add rotation on the y. You move it left, you're going to take away rotation on the y. And then we're going to say current rotation equals vector 3 dot lerp between our current rotation and our target rotation by our rotation speed times time dot delta time. And then we end it by saying transform dot rotation equals current rotation. Sorry, that's not transform dot rotation. That's transform dot Euler angles equals current rotation. There we go. All right, let's save that, and now that should work just fine. If we start the game and move the mouse, let's also take out the character preview camera. That can't be in there because if we rotate the camera as well, you won't notice the rotation. So there we go. We move the mouse from left to right, and that rotates the game object that the character is under and the plane is under. And because the camera is not under the game object that is rotating, it's not rotating, obviously. So because the game object is rotating, you can see the rotation. So just to go over this one more time, if we go back in here, we can see that we have a camera input from our player's input actions, and we're passing value to our camera input variable here. So we're taking the input from the camera when it's being moved. That's over here in our player controls. As you can see, it is a a vector 2 pass-through. That means it's taking values from the up and down and left and right movement of the mouse, and then we're passing those values back here to the camera input variable we made here locally, and then we're taking the x value out of that specifically down here, and we're seeing if that changes, and if it becomes more, we're adding rotation. If it becomes less, we're taking away rotation, and the x value is just when you move the mouse left or right. If it's at 0, there is no mouse movement. And after we've done that, we're just rotating the character, or the game object the character is positioned under, actually, appropriately. So you can see here, this is the Y rotation. If I actually move the mouse, you can see that change now in real time. And that's it. Very simple. Just to make it super clear, my variable is only called camera, or camera input, because in my actual project for this tutorial series for Dark Souls Unity, it controls the camera. When I move the mouse, it moves the camera. So really, that variable is just getting information from the mouse movement, or that input rather. And then we're passing that information onto the variable, which I called camera input. And I called it camera input because, again, it is called camera in my player controls. One also important note, if the empty game object that you are rotating is not positioned centered on the player, so if you have the player just a little bit outside of it, when you rotate the game object, the player will almost spin in a carousel rotation. So make sure the player is actually on the same position and is centered with that game object that you're rotating. And do the same for any object that the player is standing on, like a plane or whatever, etc., etc. Alright guys, that is it for part 1. If you liked the video, be sure to drop a like. It does genuinely help out my series so much. Leave a comment, help appease the YouTube algorithm gods, and check out my Patreon below if you're feeling like a super champion.